Hello there, Ray here, and joining me is Pingyu, one of the Protect members, and today we'd like to show you three different types of queries, which are all two-dimensional TNT queries. First, we're going to talk a little bit about each of these queries, then we're going to show you how you can set them up and the best way to use them. All three of these TNT queries are based off of a duplication glitch that does with TNT that Pi showed, which allows you to, when you push the TNT forward in a setting like this, then this will cause the TNT to duplicate, and it'll cause the entity form to be placed here, which will go down and is able to destroy blocks. This allows us to be able to query out large areas by using a device such as this. The idea behind a two-dimensional TNT query is that we will carpet bomb an area from one side to the other side, and then we will turn the TNT duplicator around and send it back again, and we'll keep making these strips. Eventually we will be able to remove large amounts of material just by using a single machine. These queries have three main components. They have two docking bays, and then they also have the most important part, which is the TNT duplicators, which are hooked up to a bi-directional engine. And down here is the docking bay, which will allow the machine to return the other direction. And we put this one at the far side of the query. And its objective is to stop the TNT duplicators that are coming in, then move itself forward, and also send the whole device back the other direction. Then this docking bay will allow the TNT duplicators to come in and do a very similar thing, except it will also move the entire duplicator forward 1 meter while moving itself forward and sending it back the other direction. Now the duplicators itself consist of two different duplicators. We got one on both sides, and we also have a bi-directional engine that is going back and forth. And by using this, we can slowly creep meter by meter forward while also duplicating TNT in the entire process. And by doing this, you can see we can create large holes. This query here was designed by Pingyu and myself, as well as KK and Sean helped too. Now this, some things to notice about this one is that it has the simple TNT duplicator in the front as well as the back, and this is the one that Pi showed, and it only duplicates the TNT in one direction, and that's why we have two of them, so that when it goes one way it duplicates it, and then when it goes the other way it uses this one to duplicate it. So it also uses a bi-directional engine in the center of it, and we just have some devices over here that would update it as well as move themselves forward. This one's a little bit more complicated. There's quite a few different powering so that each device is powered at the right time, and by pushing each piece differently, we can allow it so that they update themselves properly and will take off afterwards. We also have these stopping devices, which are mostly just based on the push limit, so they can't push anymore. And this way we can hold him still while moving him forward. And same goes to this side. This side is also based on the push limit, so you just can't push these blocks forward. That's pretty much all there is to this type of query. This query here was our second design that we came up with, and this is after we've seen that design, and we thought, well, it uses two different types of TNT duplicators just to do one job. So here we messed around with where we position the TNT as well as the rail, and by placing the rail underneath of the TNT, we were able to have it so that the TNT would duplicate going both one direction as well as the other. Now this is different than having the rail in front of the TNT, which would only cause it to go one direction. This allows us to make a lot smaller device, and we can use the same TNT to go both forward and backwards. Otherwise, the rest of the device is somewhat similar. We have a lot of pistons which are being powered at a very specific order to push the entire device forward. And we also use, on this side, we use the push limit, and that's why we have an extra block here just to allow it so that the TNT duplicator cannot push through this glass here. On the opposite side, we have a little bit different setup, which is a device which will also move itself forward, but instead of using the push limit, we would have a extended piston here which cannot be moved by any type of other pistons. Once the piston is extended, it's an immovable block, and this way we can easily stop the device, and it also activates it and sends it back the other direction. Using this type of duplicator, you notice that the TNT is being pushed forward by the slime blocks and in one direction, but then going back the other direction, it drops straight down. Because of this, you will want to make sure to space out the device so that it will overlap eventually. This query here is the third and final one that we have designed, and this is by far the best as well, because this type has a segment which has two TNT which are being duplicated on a single segment hooked to a bi-directional engine. It's pretty amazing. Pingyu came up with this design here, and you can see it works very well too. Now, the other parts of the TNT duplicator other parts of this query are similar, but they're a little bit specialized. This side here is pretty much very similar to the other one, where we use an extended piston to stop it, and it moves itself forward, as well as turning the entire device around the other direction. Now this side here is quite a bit more complicated and does quite a few different things. What it does is, since we have two TNT inside of this segment here, we have to be very careful when moving it forward, because this TNT is touching this slime block here, which would update it if it's not moved correctly, and that would cause the actual block of TNT, which is right here, to turn into a prime TNT, and we would lose it. So we only want it to be duplicating, and because of this reason, we have it come into this holding bay here, and we have to remove the minecart as well as the power rail, or the detector rail, which is underneath of it. And the way we do this is that when the minecart is on top of the detector rail, it will come across here and it will activate this piston, which will push it over here. And then from over here, it will activate this piston as well as this piston, which after the whole device has moved forward, will send it back over on this side. It moves quite fast, but you can see that it works just fine. And by doing this, we can disable the entire segment so it's not duplicating TNT until we are ready to send it back the other direction. So this query here we call the double prime two-way, two-dimensional TNT query. Where the name comes from is the double prime is that it's duplicating 2' TNT, and it's doing this two-way, so that's where we get double prime two-way, because it's going both forward and backwards. It's duplicating 2 TNT. And then we got the two-dimensional is because this query will move side to side as well as forward, and this will cover a two-dimensional plane over top of our perimeter. So that's where we get the two-dimensional from. And TNT query is because we're using TNT to query out an area. Now, we did not give names to the other two ones that we built, because we built quite a few different types of those, and if you would like to see some other types of those that we have designed, I will put some links down in the descriptions to some pictures of those. So we're using the carpet mod to slow down the server so that you can see what is happening, and you can see the engines coming in as well as the segment which has both of the TNT attached to it, and the actual TNT is not exploding there or else it would destroy it, but it's really down there. And you can see it's coming in, and this hopper, or this minecart here, as well as the rail underneath of it, is coming through, and once it comes in front of this piston over here, you'll see that it will power it. So this piston here gets powered, that moves this one forward, which will power this piston, move that forward, and then come over here, power this piston, and move it back again. It's pretty complicated, and the timing is very precise, and Pingyu did an amazing job at compacting this all down into such a small area. You can see it's very nicely compacted. It's really amazing how much stuff is in there as well. The one thing to mention is that if you have a player riding inside of the minecart, Pingyu made it so that you would not take suffocation damage. This way the player could ride on top of the segment with the bidirectional engine as well as the TNT duplicators. This way you could always make sure to keep this part as in entity processing chunks. So you could actually make queries that are much larger than just a area which one player could load as entity processing chunks. Another thing to point out in here is the use of this terracotta blocks. Since terracotta blocks can only be moved forward by pistons, and they will not be moved sideways by a slime block, so we can have the entire segment of that come by and not interfere with the terracotta blocks. And once it comes in here, we can use them to push it all forward 1 meter, and when the device is sent back the other direction, it will also be able to move past this without interfering with them. The use of the power detector rail as well as the minecart on top of that can be also represented by a redstone block, because it is very important. If you do not have this, it will not work, because this redstone block you see can power this as well as power this piston over here, and by doing this we can allow to minimize the shape of this entire device on this side just by using the power of the detector rail and the minecart, which is pretty cool. The whole quarry is quite small. There's only 88 blocks and it's only 4 meters high, and there's only 15 observers in the entire thing. So now we're going to show you how you can use this query in your very own survival world. It's very important to understand how to set this query up so that you can get the most out of it. The most important thing about this query is finding the right location to set it up. If you take the time to find the right location, it will save you a lot more time later on. Now, one of the most important things about the location is that it is already pretty low and flat. So I recommend plains or icy plains or a really flat desert. Now you're trying to find a perimeter. If you're trying to make a perimeter, you want to obviously make one that you can use. So if you have to make like a quad witch perimeter, then you're kind of stuck wherever location you're going to place that at. If you're making like a general mob farm for the overworld, then you can kind of choose what location you want to build it at. And if you find a location that's very flat and is a 17 by 17 chunk area that is quite flat, then you can easily run this quarry over top of it and do this all in one go without having to move the quarry up or down. The second most important thing about finding a good place to quarry out is a location that has less liquids. Now, the less there is liquids and pockets of water or lava in the quarrying area that you will be removing blocks from will allow you to be able to do less work in general as well. Now, because TNT, when it falls into liquids, is not able to destroy the blocks, and also liquids will be able to pour out. So it's important ahead of time to go ahead and remove all the surface liquids such as lava or water, and if you have access to the your world download or a copy of your world, then you can go under and inside the layers where there is lakes, remove those as well, or you could just use the seed, and this would show you the very bottom layers, but some of the top lakes are randomly generated, so they wouldn't be exactly in the same location if you use the seed. Now you can easily get rid of like the top layers and even some of the middle layers of lakes, but at the very bottom there is lava which will generate, and this is probably the hardest to get rid of. But if you do take the time to get rid of this ahead of time, this will save you a lot of time later on. So on this side here is an example of us where we remove the liquids from the surface as well as the middle, and even liquids at the very bottom. You can see how nice and clean it looks at the end. And on this side is an example where we remove liquids at the surface as well as the center, but we do not remove any liquids at the very bottom layer where like the lava would normally generate. You can see that down here, every time the liquid pours out, it covers up more surface area, and all this blocks underneath here cannot be removed by the TNT because once it sets in liquid and blows up, it's not able to destroy any blocks. So you could come in later on and remove all this liquid and then have to mine out the rest by hand, but it may be worth it just to go ahead and remove the liquid before you ever start quarrying. Ideally, if you want to have it so that the TNT duplicators will not destroy themselves, you want to have at least 16 meters between the bottom and the very highest point in which you're trying to destroy. So see, these trees are quite high and this landmass is even higher yet. So either you want to move your whole device up higher, or else you just want to come in and remove any high pieces you have. This is why it's important to come ahead and find a location that is ideal rather than trying to have to remove large land masses just to run this query. Now, another thing to point out is that level 90 is about ideal. You can see this is at level 90 right here, and you can see it pretty much destroys all the blocks all the way down to bedrock. If you would want to have it so that the quarry would run over top and destroy the remaining blocks in here, then all you have to do is lower down your segment here as well as the either side, and this way it would be able to reach it. But this just means that you will have to make sure that the rest of the top of the land is a little bit lower. But with this one quarry, we are able to run the entire thing all the way down to bedrock without having to move it down. So for this segment out here, we want to place it a little bit past where the edge of the quarry will be. This way, when the device is turned around, you can see one TNT, when duplicates, gets pushed up against a slime block and gets kind of launched forward. And because of this, the edge is kind of right here. That is where the first one will land. And by moving it back a little bit, this allows you to make sure that this is the area where both TNT are able to hit, and you get the maximum amount of damage being done here. And that is why you just move it back a little bit outside of the edge of where your perimeter wants to be. But on the other side, you don't have to do this. You can place the entire contraption with this segment over here, right along the edge, and it will do a fine job at removing all the blocks underneath of it. So on average, you would keep this contraption at about wide level 90, as you can see, and this does a pretty good job for most normal flat terrain. Another thing to point out is that when the player is AFKing, you see it doesn't take any damage, but also when you run this thing while AFKing, you want to make sure that these segments over here are properly lit. So you want to come in and probably grab yourself some glowstone, and just make sure that you have some glowstone on here so that when you leave the area and come back, you don't have mobs spawning on top of this. Same thing goes for this device over here. They're pretty small devices, so it only takes like one piece of glowstone, and it will cover the entire area to prevent mobs from spawning on it. One thing to keep in mind, even though it's quite rare, is that lightning can update some of these parts, like this observer here that's facing upwards. And if lightning would come by and would happen to strike this TNT here it could cause a flame, which would cause the TNT to break off. Now, that would be quite rare, and with such a small device, it's unlikely that would happen, but you can avoid this just by sleeping the nights away, and therefore you wouldn't have any storms ever occurring. So if you do remove all the liquids in the area, the TNT will have no trouble destroying the majority of the blocks. But it still will not be able to destroy obsidian, so any area that had lava and water beside it and they created obsidian in the world, it will not be able to destroy this. But you can see that even though it came over top of this, it did a really good job at cleaning up all the blocks underneath of this, even though this big chunk was here. Another thing to point out, if you do want to save any monster spawners, then you can come in and build a 3x3x3 cube around them and just fill it completely in. And then if there's any TNT that lands on top of it, it won't be able to destroy the spawner inside of it, which is really nice. Now, if you do not want to destroy the diamonds at the very lower layers, you could come in and move the entire quarry up high enough so that it only destroys up to the 16th meter area, so that you can come in and mine all the precious ores down here, such as diamonds or redstone or lapis, without having it destroyed by the TNT. This also could be nice because then you could come in and remove any of the liquids that are down here at the same time. So with this quarry, you can do an entire perimeter of a 16 by 16 chunks only in 18.5 hours. You can do this all while AFKing, and you don't have to really do anything. Just come back after that much time and you'll have the entire perimeter done for you. So this quarry is mostly designed for the overworld, but if you want to, you can apply this to the end dimension since there is no liquids there that generate naturally. And you can also apply this to the nether dimension if you want to, but there is small pockets of lava that do appear randomly. So if you want to, as this thing is destroying the netherrack, you could come in and remove those pockets of lava, and this way it can continue on. Big thanks to Mythical Pingu, who has his own channel where he does tons of slimestone. He helped me design this as well as compact it, but on his channel he has tons of unique builds, such as a tank that can drive over terrain, and a penguin that can attack you, as well as a movable cannon, which is something I've never seen before, so go on and check out his channel. There you have it, guys, how to create a simple perimeter with just a few blocks. And if you found this interesting, show me the like. If you'd like to see more contraptions like this, subscribe, and don't forget to comment. Bye-bye!